Great. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. So my name is Ben Swainbank, and I am the founder and president of Oceanid MRV. And yeah, we work in marine carbon dioxide removal. And so we work with companies that are using the powers of the ocean to extract carbon dioxide from the air at scale. And we offering them the verification services and the market access services that they need to really kind of run their business and to make it successful. So this is the world we find ourselves in today, right? Even with a massive, aggressive, completely successful decarbonization initiative, that really, in order to meet any of our climate goals, we really need to pair that with atmospheric carbon dioxide removal at a similar scale, kind of matching, at least in some portion of the ratios that are being emitted today. So billions of tons of emissions, and we need to get to a gigaton scale, billions of tons of carbon being removed from the atmosphere every year in order to kind of meet our objectives to ever get to net neutrality. And so that's where we're working. We're working in this carbon removal space. And that's also the scale that we're thinking at. We're working with our partners to say, all right, how can you do this at gigaton scale? And so we think that the most promising solutions, the most scalable solutions are to be found within the oceans. And there's just a lot of advantages within the ocean pathways. Macroalgae and other ocean organisms kind of have a growth rate that's much, much higher than terrestrial plants. That there are opportunities to electrochemically or change the chemistry of the ocean in such a way to increase carbon uptake. The carbon concentration of the water is higher. And so across a bunch of different pathways, there are just a lot of very promising ways to really operate. You've got the resources to play at the scale that we really need to work at. But there are also a tremendous number of unknowns, a bunch of problems in trying to do this. And so there are people doing it today. There are a variety of companies that are using these various pathways to extract carbon from the atmosphere, and then they want to sell it into carbon markets or into the sophisticated purchasers. And right now, there's a bunch of challenges to do that. The kind of necessary pieces of the kind of economic ecosystem don't exist. So you could plant some seaweed and sink it to the bottom of the ocean and try to convince Frontier Capital to purchase from you, and their first question is going to be, well, what's your MRV standard? Like, how can you prove that this really happened? How did you, who's your verifier? Like how? And because these things don't exist, that's a big problem. And so we are here to kind of by providing critical pieces that are kind of missing within this value chain, be able to kind of unlock the whole thing and build out this ecosystem, this pathway between the suppliers and then the purchasers and the markets. And so, we've got a lot of excellent traction among the people who are trying to do this. They recognize early that this is a big problem for them, that somebody kind of needs to be playing this role. And so we've got a wide group of groups across a bunch of different pathways that we're excited to be working with. And then also a very robust pipeline of organizations that we're talking to that we're looking forward to working with in the months ahead. And the reason for that is that, so if you're in the CDR business, proof of sequestration is your product. That's the thing you are selling. That's really all you have. And so if you don't have a credible verification standard, if there's not a pathway to prove that you're doing what you're claiming you're doing, you don't really have a business. And within the marine space, it's quite complicated. And so the standards don't yet exist for a variety of reasons. And some of the reasons for that is that the scientific community, who best understands these protocols, best understands kind of the science of it all, they're really quite wary of writing commercial standards, especially if there's still areas of the science that are being explored. There's kind of lots of work to be done. And so there's uncertainty involved. And so they're very wary of kind of writing commercial standards to apply to that. And so what companies are doing right now is they're having to write their own standards. If they want to sell to a provider, they say, well, we think this is the appropriate way to measure this. We're building out our own infrastructure to do it. And so we think this is the appropriate standard. And so two people that are doing relatively similar things might have kind of different standards. And in both cases, there's a conflict of interest. And so you really require this commercial and scientific perspective to come together to do it. And so that's what we're doing. We're kind of building out kind of long-term partnerships with our partners. And so we want to both design these standards, and then we'll collect and review the MRV data, and we'll be their verifiers, we'll be their carbon accountants, we'll be their pathways into the markets. And so ocean science is really central to what we're doing. And so we've kind of built our core team around that, both oceanographers on our internal staff, and then really great, knowledgeable people within the industry in general. And so we really see this as, a huge opportunity, a vital role, just growing industry, wide open space, but also reduce risks. We're not really assuming the operational risk of any of these particular pathways. And so our revenue model is based on taking a small percentage of our company's offsets. And so as they grow and scale into megatons and gigaton scales, we would grow and scale with them as well. We would share in their successes.
And time is up.
Okay, yeah, and so this is our pre-seed round. We're looking to raise a $750K to launch, proof of concept end-to-end CDR initiatives.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on the business model while we're bringing the other investors in?
Sure. Yeah, and so we work closely with companies, and we say, what exactly is your process? And then we begin work with them to design an MRV, an appropriate MRV protocol, kind of fitting them for their scale, for their process. And then we'll kind of decide collectively what data needs to be gathered, and then they'll kind of send that to us, and then we will kind of package that up, certify it, verify it, and then make it available to the carbon markets, carbon purchasers. And we're relatively innovative in that we're not charging lots of money on the upfront. We're kind of free to work with. We do the methodology development at no cost, software integration at no cost. But then we charge a little bit of a small percentage on the back end. So as the industry grows and scales, we would retain a small percentage of that.
Roughly how much?
2 to 5%. So kind of caps out at around 2% at the megaton scale.
And how do you see the carbon capture space playing out in terms of the various technologies and what the kind of distribution of those will be like?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different marine pathways. So we think in general, of course, marine is not the only aspect of CDR in general, right? There's DAC, there's forestry and things like that. But if you're looking at kind of the durable pathways, the thing we need at least 100 years durability standard, kind of guaranteed irreversible 100 years, which is where we kind of the product, that's what we're certifying, that's what the world needs, right? There, I think, trees are now very problematic. So I think the ocean is really going to be a big portion of it. There's DAC, there's biochar. They're both, they both have great potential. We wish them well. There's also more than enough carbon for everybody, right? And so, but to like a world in which is going at a gigaton scale, we think that's going to be the ocean. Like that's really where the action is. And it probably will be like alkalinity is certainly getting the most traction. Direct ocean capture has got a lot of potential. It has some advantages over direct air capture. Biomass has enormous potential, but there are concerns if you look up into the megaton scale, if it's really going to be able to get really beyond that. But we are kind of not at this stage, it's very, very early in the industry. We are not in the business of picking winners and losers. We want to work with everybody who's just getting started, and if there are obstacles, see if we can overcome them. We just kind of move the whole space forward, move the whole industry forward.
So let me see if I'm characterizing this right. You'd be a service provider for somebody like Charm Industries, which is a biomass to ocean storage. Yeah. Okay. So how is that defensible? Like, I'd love to know your dealings against competition, and how is that scalable in a way that's not a consulting firm? Because consulting firms are really freaking hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like right now there's a big need for this in the industry, right? So on both on provider side and on the purchasing side, right? And even we'll talk to carbon markets and they'll say, yeah, we'd love to take the product. We need somebody to verify it, right? And so there's a big hole in the space right now that there's an opportunity for us to fill. So part of it is just kind of building the partnerships with everybody, building the expertise, building the knowledge, being the first early player, capturing the market is going to be a big one. And also, I think what we're doing is a sticky service. And so we'll be baked into their operational details. All their data will be funneling through us. We're their pathway into the carbon markets, which is where they make all of their money, right? So that I think can be a sticky service. Other aspects of it, though, you're right. We are in the transparency business, like credibility and defined standards and open standards and building these things is very much kind of part of what we're trying to do. We more than trying to build moats, we really are trying to build bridges, right? We know that there's a lot of weight that needs to go over a lot of bridges, and we want to collect a toll. But we were very much kind of in the end. It's possible in the future that people will go over our bridges and they didn't pay the toll. But I don't know. That's from an investor perspective, that may make you nervous. But from an impact perspective, that is.
So I think you've got a business here. To be clear, I think there's a big business to be had here, but I don't know if it's a venture-backed startup that you have.
Yeah.
And so, because we're, on the digital side of things, on the software side of things, people are always looking for 10x, 100x, 1000x returns. for investing early. Like margins on your kind of business might not be there for that.
Yeah.
Well,
So right now our agreements are like saying 2 to 5% at scale, right? And essentially zero until then, right? And so that's the question, right? In the future, will anybody will kind of achieve these scales, and will they be paying it to us, right? And so there certainly is value in playing this certifier role, this packaging role. Even after all the standards are developed, even after the industry's mature, there's definitely value in that. Now, is it, even if it's half a percentage, we're talking billion. I've had conversations with people. They're like, "Hey, we're looking to do 1 billion tons at $100 a ton. That's $100 billion. Are we really going to give you 2%?" And it's a kind of a surreal conversation to be having at this stage. But it's also like, well, maybe not. But let's figure it out together, right? There's definitely like money here, value here, a tremendous amount of it probably, and exactly how much it's going to happen. I really know kind of what agreements they're willing to sign today, and that's where we're at. Right.
Hold on to those contracts for sure. Okay, fair.
I have a few follow-on questions on this business model as well. The first one is that for most marine carbon capture today, it's and actually that goes for many other pathways, but in particular for the marine one, those are credits that are not done today. They are going to be done in the future, and Frontiers and other few players are paying upfront, but the credits themselves, which is a part that you actually take the percentage on, would only be delivered later. So that that creates already a cash flow type of problem for you if you're only counting in once delivered. And also maybe a misalignment of incentives there, in a sense, for you to be the standard, like the one to define the standard, because obviously like you would take the percentage of whatever is delivered. So would that at any point be an issue for people criticizing you for being able to verify a number of credits where that it's also aligned with your incentives? And maybe just a final little one to add to all of those. I've heard, and that I'd love for you to correct me on that one, that today the commercialization of credits for ocean carbon capture is still not entirely legal, or there isn't a regulatory framework to allow for that. So I'd love to hear your elaboration on those three somewhat interconnected issues.
All right, let's see. I'll see if I can remember them all. So beginning the last one, then there's kind of permitting and certainly an area that's in flux in terms of permitting and other kind of legality issues. There are things that are projects that are proceeding. There's things proceeding on the policy front. So in terms of is this legal? One, it's that's a burden that's being borne by the suppliers more than us, but they're proceeding. I think that's going to be overcome. The other question is kind of, is it certified? Right now there are no certification methodologies. That's precisely the role that we're looking to play. So in that sense, it's not legal in the sense that they're not really in any markets because there's no way to get it certified precisely. And incentives. Okay, so then the incentives, you're right. We are certainly kind of on the supplier's side. We definitely, our business model is based around, as this industry grows and scales, we want to be incorporated into it. Regardless of what our business model was, right? We could be a nonprofit. We could take no money whatsoever from the supply side. These will undergo tremendous scrutiny. They must undergo. If you're trying to operate at the scale that the world needs us to operate at, if you're asking for people to pay $500 a ton, and you're saying it's going to be proven that's gone for 1,000 years, you're going to be under a lot of scrutiny. You'll be a lot of scrutiny from the scientific community. You'll be under a lot of scrutiny from the market, the purchasing side community. This very much has to be real. And so it's almost kind of independent of where our incentives are, where our alignment is. There's no fooling anyone. But also, that's not where the opportunity is either. The world needs this to be real. We need it to be real. Our partners need to be real. So they have to be robust, credible, commercially viable, but scientifically sound standards, or we don't have a business. And so it's really independent of kind of our business model there.
Yes and no. There's perception as well. If you have a banker working 50% of his time at a bank and 50% of his time at the IRS, are you really going to trust that banker? And the answer is absolutely not. Right. And it's because incentives trump everything else, unfortunately. I think that I do think that is a bit of a problem potentially.
For sure.
In that regard, how do you see? Sorry, how do you see existing platforms or the existing standards that are developing for other areas of the carbon market? Would there be a role for them to also be ruling or be taking a more active role within the marine pathway as well?
Yeah, potentially. So right now the CDR industry is kind of split into, I put them into 3 different buckets. There's all things tree, which is kind of problematic because you're either growing a new tree or you're not, and it's going to maybe turn down or it's not, and the trees are tricky, but there's lots of trees. Then there's the things like biochar and DAC, which have pretty robust MRV standards. It's actually not that hard to measure like what you've done. And so those are going full speed ahead, and there's a lot of credibility around what they're certifying. They're really just kind of how much supply can you produce. And then there's everything else, which is primarily the marine space, which has significant challenges, which has great additionality and durability stories. You can, if you've harvested a bunch of kelp and then you sunk it to the bottom of the ocean, that's a discrete event. There's reason to expect that it'll still be there in centuries from now. But there are certainly MRV challenges around kind of each step of the way, around the air sea exchange, around that durability at depth, around the carbon cycling in the deep ocean. And so there are definitely like pieces that must be addressed along each step of the way. And so that's why there's so much work to be done within the marine MRV space. And that's kind of why it's different than both trees and things like that. There are things like enhanced weathering, which kind of have similar-ish MRV challenges to the marine space as well.
Sure, but you see exactly, for instance, for enhanced rock weathering, you see platforms like Puro or even Vera and others who have been in the space for a little longer already trying to provide new standards for them as well. So why wouldn't
they might be? Yeah, they might be. So right now, I can say that they aren't really yet. I've spoken with all of them, and they're not kind of rushing into the marine space. Everyone's quite nervous about it. We are kind of pioneers in many ways. But Puro is doing like a terrestrial biomass sunk at depth step. So they are kind of, that's a kind of a first foray into the ocean, looking at some of the same issues as well. And so those issues, those efforts will expand, and there is both current interest and the interest will grow as well. But also there's just a lot of work to be done, a big opportunity here as well.